All right, guys, we are back, and this is where the project actually gets to be fun. This is the fun part, because I'm not gonna lie, everything else up to this point sucks. It sucks. It's a lot of work, and this is where you actually get to see something starting to look like something, and it kind of starts to come alive. So we're gonna marbleize, right? I have the booth running right now, and if you guys have seen the other video that I did on marbleizing, actually the lesser amount of airflow that you have, the better, only because it kind of slows down the drying process. But we're gonna do this front section. I'll do the hood, and then when I do the sides, what I'll do is I'm gonna spray a section, and then I'll turn the booth off so we don't have any air movement, right? So nothing's happening in terms of air movement, just to try to slow it down as much as possible. But the hood, it'll be all right. So in the other video that I did, I kind of did two different approaches. I've done it before where I actually spray my marbleizing color, which in this case is gonna be the fine or medium fine aluminum. I've sprayed it on a palette, and I kind of transfer off that palette with the saran wrap and kind of put the color on, take it off. For this particular project, just because of the size, I'm just going to go ahead and spray a medium wet coat on the entire area that I'm working on, and then I'm just going to work just like a traditional marbleizer. I'm just going to work and kind of pull it off and put it on, pull it off. When I do the sides, I'm going to have the owner of the car, Adam, helping me. So we can have two guys, and we'll just kind of like on and off, you know, and get it to where we want, and I can yell at him, and he gets to be the scapegoat. If it doesn't look right, I can just say, Adam never did this before, and it's his fault. So it's way easier that way. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys. So, simple thing, right? Just food for thought too. When I sprayed that wicked opaque black, that was 10% right out of the bottle. 10% 4011 reducer, nothing fancy. This is the same way. So this is our medium aluminum, or fine aluminum, 10% of our 4011, and I added just a splash of 4050, just a little bit, just to help it dry faster. But I don't want to, like again, I don't want to kind of expedite that drying process. I actually want this to stay wet, so I can manipulate it and work it. So let me move this side out of the way. Put this over here so it doesn't blow away when I start to spray. So here we go. All right, since I was gonna get a bigger piece, I went ahead and turned the booth off too, so kind of had the opportunity to kill it a little bit. But this is it. You really don't want to stick your fingers in this much, because you're gonna start to create a pattern, and kind of the beauty of this is to let it kind of happen naturally, so it just looks extremely random. You just kind of let gravity do its thing. It's actually really nice on the hood because you are working on a horizontal surface versus the sides. So the sides are going to be a little bit trickier. This is it right here. This is just on and off. All right, so I grabbed another piece. Once it starts to get kind of loaded up with material, you can discard it and grab a fresh piece. One of the things too you can do is kind of stretch it and kind of let it do its thing. As it kind of shrinks up, it'll give you a little more of a linear kind of a pattern. Looks really cool. So what we are going to do is kind of give a base. This is, if you remember, this was aluminum fine, or wicked aluminum fine is what we use for the base. So it has a nice look to it, but it's a little softer in terms of metallic. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is kind of give a little pop to all this, and I mixed equal parts Hot Rod Sparkle white, Hot Rod Sparkle gold, and Hot Rod Sparkle green. So I did them 1-to-1, no 40-50 in this because I'm not trying to really build, and all I'm trying to do is kind of dust on a coat, so an effect coat basically over the whole graphic. So I reduced that about 20%, only because I'm not, again, trying to spray this. I'd rather have a little less film build and just kind of have more of the flake hit the surface. So I run about 20%, so I'm gonna spray this dry. Like I said, I don't want to build up material. It's gonna start bridging on the edges of all our fine line tape. So we're actually gonna go back over this, do some highlights and some random color patches with our Wicked Pearl yellow, I'll get it, green. It's been a long night. Wicked Pearl green is gonna go over the top, and then what I'll do is I'll come back, maybe hit it with a little more Hot Rod Sparkle green, just green at that point to kind of go like high-low, and then we're gonna start spraying candy over the top of that. So that's kind of why I'm at the point where we're saying I'm doing this more of as an effect. I'm not trying to bridge, because we are gonna have a decent amount of material on here. I'm trying to keep it as minimal as possible. So if you guys want, I will go ahead and spray again. I'm using a little gun. This is an LPH 300. So it's small because all I'm trying to do is kind of focus it on my graphic area. And again, I'm just putting it on like I would put a drop coat, so it's like a medium wet coat, not really trying to go heavy. I want more of the flake to go on the surface and not really have buildup of the carrier itself. All right, guys, our Hot Rod Sparkle mixture is all dry. It's been about 20 minutes. Again, we got good airflow. We are in a booth, kind of a semi-controlled environment in terms of airflow. It's a little humid today, right around 65% humidity, 75, 85 degrees. So we're kind of running that cusp, which is okay. Again, just kind of wait a little bit longer. If you have open air conditions to spray in the shop, you're just gonna have to have a little bit of air movement. And again, the key is this is totally dry. All right, this is not like semi, this is not tacky, this is 100% dry. If you do that every time between coats or between steps, it's just gonna be that much more beneficial. It's really not something you can do wet on wet in terms of your spraying and your mixture. So, what I have now is my Pearl Lime Green, the one that I had a hard time saying before. I called it 3 different colors. So this is Pearl Lime Green. It's pretty transparent in nature already. And if you can see, I sprayed a little bit up here, just a little test, and that's good. That's exactly what I want. I want something a little transparent so I don't completely mask all the texture that we have and all the marble, but I want to darken up the top and the bottom of the graphic itself. And I'd rather do it with 1 or 2 coats of this and then just be able to put 2 coats of candy over the whole thing rather than having to layer a bunch of candy to build up my color. And the only reason is because I don't want to have a massive graphic edge right here. I don't want to get to the point where I have so much material on here, I'm bridging that tape, and when we untape this thing, it's got like a huge, huge graphic that we're trying to bury out with clear. So if I can keep it as minimal as possible, that's going to be way more beneficial. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, like I said, with this Pearl Lime Green. Again, it's kind of in the same color family of what we have. We're going to use Poison Green over the top. And I have my gun. I'm using my LPH 80 right now. Kind of narrow fan. I just want to kind of ride the edge of this graphic, kind of like I would a drop shadow with an airbrush, but I can move a little bit faster because of the spray gun. So I'm going to go ahead and spray a little bit of pearl. right, guys, you can see I went ahead and sprayed. I kind of concentrated, like I was talking about, similar to a drop shadow, right? So I want this leading edge to be darker. And I mean, these are kind of close together, but you can see I was really light. I didn't hit the top edge of this. I want to hit the top edge of this. Leave this bit lighter. This will be heavier. This will be darker. So all those edges where your light source will be coming down this way, right, and casting a shadow. I'm really not doing a drop shadow per se, but I'm actually just trying to help kind of develop a little bit of curvature to the graphic, so it gives it a little bit of body. I will go ahead and ride the upper edge, but it's just going to be faded where I want to kind of concentrate, make my color a bit darker on those lower areas. So I'll just kind of lightly fade this, but I want this to be heavier. So everything already has one coat on it, and when I go back and do a second coat, it'll push this a little bit darker, and it'll just kind of lightly frost the top edge right here. So it kind of gives a little bit of balance shift. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and when we come back, we'll probably be spraying some candy. All right, guys, we are all dry with our pearl lime green, and now we're going to do a little thing. I don't know if you remember in that test panel, I had a little bit of a paint spatter in between the whole thing. What I did was on that test panel, I did a little bit inside the lines. I colored inside the lines, and then at the very last step after it was striped, I went ahead and flicked a little bit more color. So for this, I'm using a darker color. This is basically our Wicked transparent apple green and a little bit of our Wicked phthalo green. So the reason I'm using the Wicked colors is they're a little thinner in viscosity, and again, they're a little more transparent than our Wicked opaques. So Wicked opaques are really, really concentrated, which the last step, I actually just used our Wicked opaque limelight green for that flick. But for this, I want a little bit darker because I want to kind of build a little bit of texture underneath the candy. So I'm going to do this, let this dry, and then I'm going to candy over that. So really, it's just a matter of, this is where a test panel comes in. How much you're going to load the brush and seeing what it is you got going on. So for this, it's going to kind of more be like just a light spatter like that. I don't know how well it's going to show up on camera. I'm just trying to lightly get a little bit on there. The last thing you want to do is have something like that, which luckily that's at the top, is have this massive chunk of paint. So I'm going to go through, get this guy all spattered up. Again, this is just kind of to build a little bit of texture, a little something else going on under the base coat work. And then I'll let this dry. It's going to take a little bit longer at this point to dry just because this is heavier paint, right? So it's a big glob of paint versus spraying it. So I'm trying to keep it smaller and tighter. But we'll let this dry up, and we'll come back and we'll spray some candy. All right, guys, we are letting that paint dry up. I figured this would be a good opportunity to come back out on the bench and show you guys a little bit of mixing. If you're not familiar, if you haven't seen the other candy mixing videos, we'll just kind of give it a dry run, a real quick run in terms of what I'm mixing, how I'm spraying, and what my mindset is basically. So if you've seen the other videos, you see I usually typically recommend our candies at a 6-to-1 ratio. That means 6 parts of our 40-50 to 1 part candy. That usually works very well. It's a good starting point. If you want it a little less concentrated, you go a little less candy, you go a little more 40-50, 8-to-1, 10-to-1, 12-to-1. But the poison green is a lighter color. It's very, very subtle in terms of the concentration, I guess you could say. It's really light, right? So what I'm going to do is mix it 6-to-1, or actually I'm going to go 4-to-1, I'm sorry. I'm going to go 4-to-1 and see where that is. 4-to-1 is kind of the lower end in terms of how much candy versus 40-50. Typically with our lemon yellow and our poison green, I can get away with it. It looks okay. We're doing something that's kind of a band on the car, so it's not like an entire area that we're spraying. And I'm going to use a full-size gun on it too, so that's going to help in terms of getting that overlap and that concentration. So 4-to-1 will be good. Remember before I talked about not wanting to build up a bunch of layers to really start bridging that tape area and really start having a high spot with graphics. So I'm going to go 4-to-1. So I already have in my mixing cup, we've got ratios right there. So I went up to the 7, and then I'm going to go to the 1. I'm going to go to the 7 right there with my candy. So before I do that, I always talk about straining. These are 125 microns. These are really, really fine mesh strainers, right? So that's great for the candies. So before I even actually add it to there, I'm going to pour it right through. I'm going to go right up to my 7. So this is going to help kind of make sure there's no junk in here before I even actually mix it with my 40-50. So we're going to let that settle down, see where we are. We got a little bit more. Don't mind the bubbles. Just throwing off the measurement. If you were to look at it, you should be, whoa, that's way too high, but it's good right there. I can see my line, that's right there at my 7 mark. So that's cool. So I'm gonna let that drip, and then I'll stir that, and it is imperative, I guess you could say, to let this sit once you mix it. Really get all the candy dye in, mixed in with that 40-50. When I look at this cup before I pour it in my PPS cup, I don't wanna see any milkiness around here. I wanna make sure all this dye is completely mixed in, and it's all one uniform color, right? So I don't wanna stop it like that. I don't wanna have any of that. I wanna make sure it's all nice and green all the way around. So it's really imperative, you guys, let it sit, mix it up, stir the heck out of it, and then put it off to the side. And you can see at a 4-to-1 ratio, real quickly, I'll show you the viscosity, all right? It's not dripping off the stick, it's flowing. And that would be like the cusp in terms of what I would recommend viscosity-wise, spraying it through a big size spray gun. For an airbrush, it'll be fine. But if it's too skinny, you're gonna end up with what I call skating. It's gonna go on the panel, it's gonna kinda wanna migrate, it's not gonna stay where you want it. So that's one of those things, at this ratio, you're not gonna have to reduce with 40-11. If you over-reduce it, like if you were to follow it and say, okay, I did 4-to-1, I did 10% 40-11, it's gonna make it really thin, and it's not gonna act the way you need the candy to act. You need to have, the candy's gotta have a little bit of a gut to it so it stays where you want it, especially on a vertical surface like this. We don't want this to slide. So, got that mixed up. For this, I'm gonna spray with my Supernova. This is a Supernova, the N-Tech, so a little bit higher PSI, the Evo. It's the Evo, not the N-Tech, sorry. The N-Tech was the base coat gun. This is the Evo, this is a 1-2 tip. So it's a 1-2, and this is basically the gun that I use for every candy paint job, full size. I've never felt I need to go bigger than a 1-2. It sprays beautifully. This thing has a huge fan on it, and I actually will close up my fan control 2 full turns from wide open. So I go wide open, 2 turns close, and it just neatens up the edges of that fan just a little bit. My fluid control, as you can see, is wide open. That's it, right to the, can't turn it anymore. That's, my trigger's full pull, and I'm gonna spray this right at 29 PSI, which is their recommended air pressure. I feel it's a perfect spot for that. It sprays, atomizes extremely well, has a nice big broad fan. So what we're gonna do is put this off to the side, let it sit for about 10 minutes, and like I said, make sure it's really good and mixed up. You can see all that blue is going away, it's all green. I really can't stress this enough to make sure it's totally uniform in mixture. We'll let this sit, and we'll spray some candy. All right, guys, it's been about 10 minutes. We are ready to spray some candy. So I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna start from front, work my way to the back of the car, and this is what the first coat looks like. All right, guys, 3 coats of poison green candy is down. You can see what that looks like. It is totally dry. Not to sound like a broken record, but I can't stress that enough. Everything's gotta be dry between coats. It's gonna give you the best result. So now what I'm gonna do is go ahead and mix, actually I already have it mixed, a little bit of emerald green candy. This is our darker candy. A little more blue shade, you can see here. A little bit richer in terms of concentration. And I'm just gonna go real easy, real gently. I mixed it 4-to-1, so it's the same exact mixture as my poison green. And what I'm gonna do is just kind of ride the center line of this graphic. The way this moves, kind of up and down. I'm gonna try to just go nice and easy and just darken the center mass of this graphic and just give it a little bit of depth. So we're gonna go ahead and do that. This is actually my LPH 80 again, right? Nice little small gun. I got it pretty much closed up all the way in terms of my fan control. My fluid's wide open. I'm just gonna be able to trigger it but my fan is tightened up so it's a little more, you can see there, a little more round pattern than a fan. So this is how we're gonna do it. We'll start from the bottom, just kind of come up nice and easy. It might take a few times, a couple passes, but I'd rather have a gradual color buildup. You can see how much darker it is than the rest of it, the emerald green, that's not, or the poison green. So I'm just gonna kind of give a nice, easy fade to the rest of this. All right, guys, welcome back again. This is pretty much the last portion of this graphics. You can see now a little bit better now that this is probably dry. It's just got that dark emerald green. I mean, not dark, but dark enough in the middle, kind of going around. When I let this dry, I came back and I grabbed each door handle that I had and kind of just held it in place to see where it was and sprayed a little bit on there. I mean, it's going to be a little bit different, but it's not so much that there's so much going on. It's not going to look really stark in terms of contrast. So the last part of this is drop shadowing the bottom of each of these licks. When I say the bottom, I mean just that, I mean the bottom. So anywhere, again, we talk about light source coming from this case should be from the top down, right? So any line here will be drop shadowed. This top line will be drop shadowed. The line that's above should not have a drop shadow. The line that's above this lick right here should not have a drop shadow. The shadow should be underneath here. If you were to choose to do this, if you wanted this to look like it was over and the light source was kind of coming up, then you would do your drop shadows behind, but then you'd have to go ahead and do all these lines the same way. Then the upper ones would get it, not the lower ones. If you do the top and the bottom, it just looks strange. You're just kind of highlighting it or fogging it, kind of like what I did with that pearl lime green at the very beginning, where we just kind of rode the edge. So if you want to pull off successful drop shadows, it's more of like the less is more. And following that less is more, like I said, I opted, rather than doing black or a dark color, a lot of times guys will mix candy black and candy purple, so it's not quite black, it's a little bit. I know a couple guys, Fraser likes to use candy black and purple. Steve Van Diemen told me, gave me a long time ago a tip on mixing. He likes our transparent red oxide, and he mixes that with a color, and it kind of gets a funky dark color, but it's not so much that it just looks fake. So for this, which I've seen quite a bit too, is I'm opting for a darker color of the green, right? So I use the emerald green to shadow this. I'm gonna use emerald green, that same mixture, 4:1, right out of the cup, and I just added a little more reducer. I'm spraying with an Eclipse CS, this is a 3.5, right around 38, 40 PSI. So I needed to reduce it just a little bit. It's probably 5% reduction. At that point, it becomes more of personal preference and flow of what you want this to move like. And I want it to basically be moving as fast as my hand speed, because what I don't want to do is kind of have to chug along. I want to be able to move quick, so it's kind of a nice fluid motion. So basically, I'll go ahead and do it and show you guys what I'm talking about. So I'm going to start darker right here. You kind of ride that tape line, and just at the very edge, kind of come off the tip of that lick. So it kind of looks like this. That's exactly what I want to see. Just a little bit of float. You can let dry that up, come back, and as it comes more to the inside of this graphic, I want it dark. So it should be darker here, kind of up to nothing. That's exactly what you want. So you can come back in and kind of darken the corner, like that crotch area if you want, just to give it a little more of that shadow. But that's it. That's enough. That's perfect. It's exactly where I want it. So I'm going to go ahead and continue on and doing this. Actually, Craig Fraser has a great video on that on our YouTube channel as well, in terms of shadows and drop shadows and the do's and don'ts. So check that out if you guys want. But I'm going to go ahead and finish these and this whole side of this car, work my way around that side, and it should look like what I have in the back. All right, guys, we are back in the booth. Shocker. We went ahead, let this all the drop shadows dry up really nice. Went around, did the whole car. while that was drying, I came in and I untaped the lower section of this basic two-tone. Essentially, this is, so the top is pearl black, this is pearl black right now, and this is going to be charcoal metallic. We're going to do a little bit of a fade in there as well. I'm going to do a little bit of a medium or coarse aluminum, and then fade that down to charcoal, and then from the charcoal, we're going to go down to just straight black, a little bit of black just tinted at the bottom, so it'll just kind of get dusted in around the whole lower portion of the car. But before I go ahead and do that, if you remember, when I taped this out, we had tape here, right? So essentially, I had my fine line tape was here, right? So what was going to happen if I left that tape on there, if we masked from here up to this graphic, you would have a pearl black, kind of a pinstripe, I guess, on the outside of this, right? It'd be an 1/8 inch fine line pinstripe, which if you were going to do a sprayed pinstripe, that would be great. But I don't want it to be pinstriped in the charcoal or the pearl black. So what we're doing is actually just pulling off the lower masking, basically this whole lower section, right? So we went ahead and cleaned that all up. This is a positive graphics. This is pearl black that's going to come down into the charcoal. So this is going to stay positive masked, and the same thing with the front here. And you can see the front, we started going back through and taping this off. So I went ahead and I'm transferring basically just this graphic. I'm taping to the inside of my line, keeping it nice and tight, making sure I cut all my points. So what you're going to see is what we already have done in the back. We just went ahead and masked a straight line across the back. Now I'll go be able to take 18-inch paper, so just kind of come across the top, tape it up to the top, and we'll be able to spray. So this side is 100% done, pretty much. So we got the positive tape, and we're ready to spray. So I'm going to keep going spraying, or keep taping up the other side, and when we come back, we'll do a little bit of spraying. Hey guys, we are still here. And I keep saying it, but we are literally at the tail end of this project. Got the rest of the car, as you can see, back masked and wiped down real quick. Just did a little bit of 320, SX 320, PVG 320, the solvent base, just to make sure there's no glue residue, any kind of tape residue left over from untaping and all that stuff. So real quickly just gave it a wipe and a quick tack, blew it off. Now, we were kind of debating when I was talking to Adam, just going to go with the charcoal, or if we're going to do what I originally did. If you remember that test panel, I actually marbleized a lower section of this. I kind of did a band right underneath these graphics. Not a big section, just probably like 3 inches maybe. And I thought it looked really cool, and I did it differently. I kind of stretched it just so it was a different texture, and I thought it looked really cool. So I did that with the medium aluminum, and then I went down into the charcoal metallic. So Adam's like, yeah, man, if you want to do it, fine. He goes, don't worry about it. It's getting late. And I'm like, you know what? We're so close. We got to do it. So he talked me into it. So that's what we're going to do. I have medium aluminum mixed up in my cup, closed up my fan control on my little gun. This is LPH 300. Real tiny, nice and tiny. I'm just going to go ahead and do a little band and spray. Now I'm going to go ahead and do just this fender section because it's going to be easy enough for me to do it by myself. But really for the larger sections, just because we want to work nice and quick and keep a wet edge, I'm going to have Adam help me. So we'll get video of me just doing this one. I can show you guys what I'm talking about. And that's pretty much it. Again, it's just going to be a wet coat of silver, or actually our aluminum, just like that. You can see it's actually so wet that it's all funky looking, which is fine, because that is going to go away when I put this in there. All I want to do is kind of get those wrinkles and drag it so it's like linear. All right, we are back. Our silver is all dry. We kind of did that marbleizing, that dragging, which we thought was kind of cool. It's going to just build a little bit of texture up against the existing graphic. What I'm doing right now, because we have all this kind of overspray and all this nasty stuff, I'm just hitting this lightly with a piece of 800, right? 800 on top of a Scotch pad, just so I don't put finger marks in it, and seeing it nice and flat. I'm not leaning on this thing. I'm not going crazy. All I'm trying to do is knock off a little bit of that texture. You can hear that. It's nice and smooth now, instead of being real gritty. Just knocking off the texture so when I come back over with my charcoal, I'm not painting over basically a popcorn ceiling from all the texture that's created just from the overspray. So we used a little bit of that medium aluminum, and it is inherently grainy, but that's because of the flake itself. So knock that down anywhere the overspray is. I'm going to go over with silver. If this was a solid color, I wouldn't have to do this. You wouldn't see it. But because it is a metallic, it's going to kind of magnify any kind of little dust nibs or any kind of chunks. So that's what I'm going to do real quick. This should take about 10 minutes. We'll come back, get it all tacked off, and we'll start spraying our charcoal. All right, everything is sanded down. I quickly tacked it, wiped it. It's totally dust-free, ready to go. I have my charcoal metallic mixed up in my gun. This is the same way as all my base coat colors have been through the whole video. It's 4-to-1, basically 20-25%, 40-50, mixed in with the charcoal, 10% 40-11. Ready to spray. I'm spraying with the same gun I used to do the base coat on the overall of the car, my Supernova N-Tech. It's a 1.3. So 26 PSI. This is what it's going to look like. We're going to just kind of fade it from the bottom up into this silver. I don't want to cover the silver. I just want to work up to it, and then if I have to, I can come back with a little bit of silver and just kind of blend the two together. All right, guys, welcome back. I keep saying welcome back. Hopefully you guys didn't go anywhere. We are doing a little bit of texturing right now. So last night, after we did our drag, by the time I did my blend, my aluminum is here down to a charcoal metallic. All the overspray, all that flake kind of lost the sharpness of the edges of that drag kind of marbleizing, but we still have the texture in there, which is cool. But I really wanted to have this kind of broken up with something else. So I opted to come back in with a little bit of the Gerald Mendez texture effect stencils. And I just mixed up a little bit of our Wicked Payne's Gray and a little bit of white to lighten it. The Payne's Gray is pretty dark. I want a little bit lighter gray. And I'm just coming back and I'm using my TH1 because realistically, it just holds a little more paint, and this isn't really finesse airbrush work. All I'm doing is just coming in between the two taped areas and quickly just building a little bit of texture. All right, so I got big areas. I can come and concentrate smaller, tighter ones to give some real cool textures. And what I want to do is just kind of break up that leading area between these licks of the graphics, and I kind of want to fade them down to the bottom here. And what I'm going to do is actually, when I'm done, I'll come back and I'll hit it with a little overextended charcoal metallic and bring it up into this so these just kind of fade, completely go away. When I say overextended, I mean not reducer. I mean add a little bit of 40-50 or a transparent base to that to just make that color a bit more transparent. It's going to wash out just this harsh kind of a fade out. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing these, I mean, it's pretty simple, but there really is no right or wrong, kind of like the rest of this. What you don't want to do is end on this area, right? So I'll show you here, like if you were spraying and you were doing your fade and you ended on the edge of the stencil, you're going to get that overspray line, right? So really the key would be to stay to the inside of that stencil and just keep moving, and then you can slowly fade out kind of like that, right? So you can make it darker towards the middle, darker where I want the initial graphic. And I mean, I'm doing this right over. This is kind of repetitive. You kind of want to avoid that. You could turn it a different way and just to keep that random overlap going, and you can generate a pattern like that. Just keep in mind, just stay away from that edge because you're going to end up with a fogged line and you're going to have that halo. It looks like you actually just sprayed over a piece of tape. So food for thought. I'm gonna keep going, spray the rest of this. You can see the front is done, and actually I'll put this down and we'll go to the back side if you'd like. I already have that finished. And what we can do is, see here, where's my light? I don't know where my light is. I did have it. It's not here. Oh, it's right there. Hold on. All right. So you can see here in the backside, that's kind of what I want. Is a light, nice little gradual fade, a break off of those graphics, just close to where the tape line is. And then you can see what I did on the side here. We already did this portion. This is still might be a touch wet, but I came back with that charcoal metallic, and what I did was I sprayed over that gentle fade, so now it really does transition right to the metallic, and it's kind of almost ghosted. Depending on how the light is going to hit it. From the top I can see it, from the side it goes away. So again, just kind of soften the edge of the trail of that graphic, but it's just enough to give a little bit of a character line to the underside of this. So when I'm done with that side, what I'll do is come back and I'll do my drop shadows here on the lower portion of the tape onto the charcoal, and then the very last part of it is going to just be a little bit of a smoke black fade at the very bottom, just the lower portion of the car, almost to the point where it doesn't even touch the bumpers. You know, it'll be the very, very bottom of the bumper, the front bumper covered, maybe just the lip, but more along the lines of the rocker down. I'll fade this to black, and yeah, we'll let that dry, and then I have to pinstripe it, and then we gotta let that dry, and then we gotta clear it. So we'll see you guys in a little bit. All right, back. We are back. Went ahead and finished spraying all the textures. So the texture's all done, and I wanted to talk real quick. I wasn't going to show you guys how I was doing the fade. I just mentioned it, but I thought actually, in hindsight, I was like, man, I should probably discuss this a little bit. So two things. This is one time, like I talked about, where these little guys really shine, literally. This is the Luma. This is the one I mentioned before when I had my LPH 80. I didn't have it. Now I have it now. I do have this one for my Supernova, and I have one for my LPH 400. And the first time I used one, I was actually really impressed with how it works and what it does. It's really simple, but it makes a big difference. Regardless of how much good light you have, you can always have more. The reason I'm doing this is now as I'm spraying my metallic, I can see how much of this is actually going away in terms of getting my fade. Now, that's the other thing I want to talk about is the fade. So when you're spraying metallics, if you guys know, if you spray metallic with an airbrush versus a spray gun, or an airbrush even versus an LPH 80 with a 1.2, those two different tip sizes are going to give you two different looks in the metallic. Typically the airbrush is going to be brighter. It's going to look a little bit higher in terms of that reflection, where the LPH 80 would be a little bit duller. And I don't mean it's the way it applies the metallic, right? So it's going to stand up more with an airbrush versus lay down with an LPH 80, and even more so with a full-size spray gun. So one of the things you can do to combat that is your air pressure, adjusting your air pressure. Now this is, like I mentioned before, this is the base coat gun that I use for everything in this project, 26 PSI, which is here, right? Now because I'm gonna spray kind of a gentle fade, and I'm what I do is go from the bottom up to the top. I don't want to come from the top down because I'm going to create dry spray, more dry spray at the bottom of the panel. So I kind of want to alleviate that. So what I'm going to do is adjust my air pressure, because I do have my fan closed up a bit too. So I'm going to go ahead and drop my air pressure to about just under 20, about 18 PSI. Now what that's going to do is give me a softer spray, a softer fan to kind of mess with this, because there really is no rhyme or reason. I'm not going to go and walk the side of this car and make everything nice and even. I'm just going to kind of come in and lightly spray and mist it. So that lower air pressure is kind of doing what we have versus spray gun versus an airbrush, right? Lower atomizing pressure is going to allow the metallic to fall on rather than stand up, really be sharp. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of demonstrate that right now. We'll start on the quarter panel right here. So I'm coming just up off the quarter. Just lightly fade so that little transition just kind of goes away. Like I said, what I don't want to do is come here, not that it's a big deal here, but I don't want to come here and spray off, because all that metallic is going to stand up on the bottom of that door. So I can come in from the bottom and work my way up. I'm putting a wet coat in the door, and because it's wet, or medium wet, it's gonna allow that metallic to sit down. I won't have a big stripe line here. What I can do is afterwards, once this is all done and I'm happy with this transition, I can go back to full pressure and just stand back and kind of give myself a drop coat just to make sure that's even, but I can see it right now and it's a nice even orientation. I'm not worried about having a blotchiness everywhere. So just keep that in mind if you're doing something, especially with metallics. Solid color is not gonna be a big deal. But anytime you're working with metallics and you switch guns, tip sizes makes a big difference. The way you atomize, the atomizing pressure, the high pressure versus lower pressure is going to change the look of that metallic. So I'm gonna keep going, and when I'm back, it'll be hopefully soon enough to start wrapping this thing up. Hey guys, welcome back. I know it looks a little bit different in here. The car is actually completely out of the booth. We cleared it up over the weekend. It is now, what day is today? Tuesday. It's Tuesday, and actually Adam has to be driving the car down this Friday to the Chrysler at Carlisle event, and that's what we're trying to get done. So that's in Pennsylvania. You guys are familiar with it. Big event, big fairgrounds down in Carlisle. Really cool stuff happens there. So that's why this car is getting done. So we're pushing the envelope in terms of timing. So the car is out. We have the parts in the booth now, is what you can see, my workspace. So we got a grille, we got a spoiler, the rear bumper, which we're able to do off the car, and that was kind of the reasoning of me continuing the graphics higher up on the quarter panel. I didn't want to have to worry about painting anything crazy on this rear cover. So this is the charcoal metallic, that was the lower portion, and we just did a little bit of a fade like I did on the sides with a little bit of the smoke black. So basically just charcoal metallic down. What I am going to do is once I'm finished in here, before it does get cleared, I'm going to take a look at it versus the car and see if there's a few little spots that I need to speckle a little bit of green, that spattered effect, just so it looks continuous with the rest of the car. I don't want to have speckle at the bottom of the quarter and nothing on the bumper. It's definitely going to look a little bit off. Same thing with the handle. We got mirror covers, the window trim and the side covers. The rear handle, we had to do kind of the same thing. This is that silver that I did where the graphics were, and then charcoal, so it's a real subtle fade, but now when you put it in the hole, it's going to look like it belongs in there. I'm not a fan, you guys can tell, in terms of painting the parts on the car. If there was a way to situate this into that hole, I would have done that. But the problem is there's a little tab on here that really locks this thing in place, and it'd be almost impossible to get this back out before I cleared. I just don't like doing it because a lot of times you will get what we call a bridge, right? So if this is touching the paint, basically in that trunk area, the amount of clear that you're going to put on here, even with graphics, you know, we based this thing out, and then we did the two-tone split, and we did the marbleizing, and I mean, it's a lot of material, even with 3 coats, you know, we talked about that. It's a lot of material, and if you have the door handles on the car and you're painting over that, you got 2 things that are going to happen. A, there's a strong chance that the tape is going to pull out of the corners or creases where we have it. It's going to get a little bleed throughs and little mistapes. And B, the thing's going to be bridged. And when I say bridged, I mean just basically like molded with clear coat and material and paint. And the last thing you want to do is go have that door handle chafing on the door itself, and you're pulling on it, and where that separation, where that hinge is, it's just going to be a nightmare. So anytime you can take something apart for painting, it's definitely more beneficial in the long run. Not just the way it's going to look, but just the longevity of the paint job as well. Anywhere it starts to crack is a problem where you can get water and moisture in, and it's going to come back to bite you in the butt. So keep that in mind. So these are all pearl black. Mirror covers are pearl black. This is trim that goes up on the door, the upper door pillar covers. The handle, get the hood over here. The hood is ready to get pinstriped. I have an engine cover right here, and this is just sealer black. We went ahead and marbleized the center section, and the Hemi is taped off, so that's going to get, that's silver underneath. It's actually a factory color, so I'm just going to tape this off and spray a little bit of the pearl black on that, call that done, so that's going to be pretty cool. So it matches the car. And then we have the front bumper. The front bumper was the same thing. We pulled this off. I actually took the hood and the front bumper, obviously, off the car when it came time to clear for 2 reasons. A, I wanted to be able to get the edges of the hood, and I want to be able to get the edges of the fender and kind of have that factory look of the overspray on the top edge of the fender, and I didn't want to run the risk of leaning way over the hood and either my suit or the air hose, or any time you're trying to stretch that with 4 coats of clear, it's a lot. It's 4 opportunities to have something bad happen. So we opted to pop the hood off so I could clear that separately. You can see I have it on an Innovative stands, Innovative Ultra Rack. These are awesome stands that actually can articulate. So I can put this hood in any position I want, and it locks in place all the way up to almost 100% basically vertical. So it's a really cool feature. That's what the bumpers are on. The bumpers and actually this little squid rack that's got the spoiler and the grill is all the same thing. It's these little grippy arms that kind of articulate, and you can kind of put them wherever you need to have them. So before this stuff gets clear coated, there's a couple things that need to get striped as well. I kind of opted not to show the striping on the car because A, we were in a time crunch and I was in a hurry, and B, I am not a pinstriper. I'll be the first one to tell you that. I do not pinstripe a lot. I can do it, but there's really nothing you're going to learn from me in terms of pinstriping, nor would I want you to. So basically what we opted for was a product from Custom Creative. We got this from our friends at Spray Gunner, and this is a urethane striping paint. It's called Shamrock Green, and it is a cool kind of contrast to the color, the poison green and the emerald green. You can see it right here. That's kind of the color. So it's really, really cool. It's going to be enough of a pop, but not so crazy wildly off that it doesn't look right. If you guys have seen some of the other videos that we have done, a few, I did a hood with Craig Frazier, and the number panels that I did for here, for the doors, I did use one shot on those. And I've been using one shot for a long time, and doing it under the clear coat. As long as you kind of go with those time windows, and there is an activator that they have that you would use for basically putting that underneath clear. The problem with using one shot under clear, if you're not familiar, you guys, it's not a urethane, it's an enamel, right? So it's an enamel-based paint, and you would be putting a 2K urethane over the top. Sometimes there are compatibility issues. So the biggest thing with that is really letting that pinstripe dehydrate and dry and cure up. And they have an activator for that. Specifically for using a 2K over the top. I've always done it where I use whatever hardener for my clear coat. So if I'm using a PPG, I'm going to use their hardener for that clear. If I'm using what I actually use on this car, which is our American Icon clear, I would use a little bit of the hardener for the American Icon, mix that in with my striping enamel, and then basically just give it enough time. That's the problem. There was so much striping on this car, I didn't want to push it and have an issue where kind of had a bubbling or a ringing or sinking or lifting or any of the bad stuff. So I opted to use a urethane, which it's a little bit different in the way it pulls, a little bit different in the way you can use it. It's a great product. Actually, I'm actually really impressed with this. This is the first time I've used Custom Creative. The smell is actually really minimal. Usually, a lot of times, if you guys aren't familiar with solvent-based paints, urethanes are really, if you're not familiar, you'd be like, wow, that stinks. I'm used to it, but I was actually really impressed with it. So basically, I guess we'll kind of get right into it. I'll show you guys just a little bit of what this is going to look like. Now I'm paletting my brush. This is just a piece of actually like watercolor palette paper, coated so it doesn't absorb the paint. The biggest thing is making sure the bristles of the brush are completely wetted out. Right? Not just the tip of the brush, you want it all the way up to basically the binding of the brush. Really make sure that it's wetted out. When you hold it, when you guys see this, if you're right-handed, I don't know what left-handed people do, but you got a flat spot right here. All right, so the bristles are on this side of the brush, and you always want to hold it so the flat spot is at your thumb. Some people hold it right on the binding, some people back. I prefer to hold it just a little beyond it in the back. This is a MAC King 13. The Todd Hansen signature brush. These are awesome brushes. This is a 00. So basically, we're going to go right at it. I'll show you guys real quick. Again, I am not a striper, so there's really nothing you guys are going to learn from me on doing this. But this is, for the amount of graphics on this car, had I did a tape stripe for all this, it would have been twice as difficult in terms of the complexity of the taping. And because of the thickness of material that we put on here, there's always a chance that you're going to get bleed through from the actual tape the amount of material thickness that we had between doing the marbleizing, the base coat, and a little bit of the flake that we sprayed, and the candy. There's so much going on. I'm going to go ahead and just add another line right here because this is kind of the theme of this. And it also helps if you're a little mistake. We're kind of doing just a random kind of a pattern on this car. We're going to get in here, get this lower section. That's it. So I'm going to go ahead and finish these up, get them all cleaned up. And like I said, we're just going to do this side here and then the hood. And then when we come back and let this dry, we'll talk about what we're using for clear coat. So stick around. Okay guys, I've been saying this, it seems like for this entire video, saying this is the last step. But seriously, this is the last step. So all my striping is dry. Striping on the hood, striping on the bumper, did a little bit of splatter on the bumper to match the car. And if you saw that, I did kind of the same way in the rest of the video, just using a popsicle stick in front of my airbrush and kind of dusting it a little bit, and then kind of you can flick a little bit too, which worked. I didn't use the pipette in there because I kind of wanted this a little more subtle because it's down the bottom, so it's kind of like fading off the car. So, but again, any of those things, any of that style works if that's what the look you're after. Yeah, so the final steps here, and the other thing is I let the booth run for at least an hour after I did all the striping. And this is striping urethane, it dries a little bit faster and it is compatible with clear, but you still want to make sure that it's not sticky and tacky or any of that. You want it to be nice and dry, going to give you the best results. So you have nothing to worry about in terms of any kind of reactions with your clear coat. That's key, just like everything else, man. Just letting it dry is going to be more beneficial in the long run. If you think it's on the verge, just wait another 15 minutes. That could save a lot of trouble, a lot of headaches, in the long run. So the clear coat. For this is the first time I've used the C820. If you guys have seen a couple other videos, the majority of them I've done the C800. They have their regular clear, their high solids. I think it's a show clear. It's the C800 from American Icon. This is their Euro clear. It's a little bit thicker in terms of viscosity. It's a 2-to-1 clear, so there's no reduction. So it's 2-to-1 right out of the gate. It's actually really good that it doesn't have a reducer. I feel I prefer not to use a reducer if you can, in terms of, obviously the clear is going to dictate whether or not it needs a reducer, especially when you're doing graphics and a lot of layers of paint. Sometimes the reducer can come back to kind of bite you in the butt, in the long term, because it has a tendency to dive down and cause re-wets and all that kind of stuff. So majority of like the high solids clears are typically lighter on the reducer side or no reducer at all. So it's 2-to-1. This is kind of nice because it comes in a 5 quart, so it's a little bit bigger than a gallon. And then you got a little over half gallon of hardener for it. So realistically, you have just under 2 gallons of clear if you do it. This is like one and a quart, I think it is, a gallon and a quart if you were to measure it off, and then the hardener is just over a half gallon, so just about 2 gallons. So it's kind of nice. That is the first setup that I used that I went around the whole car with. There's a little bit left. Like I said, I did 4 coats on the car. We'll talk about that too. On these parts, I will do 4 on the hood because of the graphics. I'll do 4 on the bumper because of the graphics as well. But everything else, like the engine cover and all that stuff, is smaller. The graphics are a little bit minimal. I will probably opt to do just 2 to 3 coats. Because it's not needed, right? The only reason I'm doing 4, really hammering this stuff on, is to get rid of these edges, any kind of graphic edge. So like the spoiler, and especially this grill, this front grill shell it's actually taped on the inside, and it has like a honeycomb. So I have a ridge of fine line tape going all around this. So the last thing I want to do is go ahead and hammer on a whole bunch of material and have to worry about having that sharp edge. So the way I have this taped up, if I pop this tape as soon as I'm done spraying, I kind of have a little ripcord of my fine line tape. So while it's still wet on that last coat of clear, I will untape it very gently, and I will pull that cord, and it'll just go right around and allow that edge of clear to kind of relax over that line. So, but these will all get 2. You know, there's no reason. This is the spoiler, the grill shell, the rear bumper cover. There's nothing on it in terms of thickness. The mirror covers that I showed you before, the mirror covers and all those little door edge trims, all that stuff, the handle, that's all gonna get 2 coats of clear. So I'm kind of gonna shuffle back and forth in the booth. Again, because of the fact that this is a semi-downdraft, essentially, like I talked about before in other videos, a cross-flow booth, right? So air is coming in from the ceiling and out through the back. A majority of my overspray is coming this way, right? So the last thing I want to do is have a fresh coat of clear on something here and then go to the back and spray and have all that overspray kind of just settle and fall, or vice versa. Have something in the back that I'm clearing, which is even worse, right? And having something I haven't cleared yet in the front, and all that dry spray, just that overspray, starts to settle on the surface, and then they have to spray clear over that. Typically, if you're gonna hammer on a bunch of material and sand it flat, you're really not gonna see it, but I've always been of the mindset that you will see that texture that you start to build a little bit. So just food for thought. So as I'm doing this, as I'm kind of cycling through, I will be moving these things around again, because it's nice, these are all on wheels. So, you know, it's pretty slick. Yeah, so that's about it. So basically what I'm gonna do is mix my clear. Other portions of the video, I was talking, I wasn't wearing a respirator. We weren't really spraying solvent. I always recommend wearing a respirator, but for the clear coat on this, anytime I'm touching anything other than actually taping and fine line detail like that, I obviously don't have a glove on, but anytime I'm spraying clear coat, like when I was spraying the base coat on the car, the sealer on the car, I had a full suit, right, gloves, and my respirator. It's not only to protect the car, but it's also to protect you. You know, and with a suit, you have lint and all this stuff on your shirt and on your clothes. Even just walking out of the booth and going out into open air on the rest of the shop or wherever you are, and then coming back in, you can create or collect little pieces of junk that can end up being deposited on your part, especially if you're leaning over it. So right before I start to spray, I wipe my hose down, my air hose, make sure that there's no debris on the end of that, or at least the section that's going to be up my arm, especially going over a hood. Anything that's close, if I'm going to be swinging over that hood, the last thing I want to do is have something fall off of my air hose. That's why I have these little hangers in the booth. I can hang my hose. I try not to ever let it sit on the ground. I got these guys right here, right behind me. You can see the one over there, but really easy. Now this part of that hose is staying clean. You know, you don't have to worry about it, but little things like that make a big difference. What I will do is, from this point forward, really, from untaping and everything else, I have not really wiped any of these parts down with a wax and grease remover, right? Because everything at this stage is really, really clean. There's no reason to, because you can kind of create more problems for yourself. So at this point, a fresh tack rag and just air from my spray gun. I'm just gonna kind of blow it off, tack it off really nice, and there should not be, again, at this point in this stage, any kind of surface contamination. So that's the last thing. We'll just make sure the booth is running and get a good flow going. We'll start clearing. I'm probably not gonna have the camera in here just for that, only because there's a lot going on. I'm gonna be moving around, and this is gonna get cloudy really, really quick. You guys really aren't gonna be able to see too much. So we'll probably just leave it at that. We'll get this all cleared up, and then we'll see you guys at the end. All right, guys, there you have it, pretty much the finished product. I do want to make one statement on, we were in a time crunch, so we did have to get this car basically assembled 2 days before he was leaving to go from Connecticut down to Pennsylvania for Carlisle. So certainly this car could benefit from a second round of clear, but the nice thing is he's a pro at taking this thing apart now. So we're gonna let it sit for about a month or so. We're gonna let everything lock up. If you can smell that clear, it's still curing, right? So we're gonna let it do its thing and sand it down probably 600 to 800, and then we're gonna re-clear the outside of the car. So we'll probably pull the bumpers off, pull most of everything out again in terms of getting a nice clean paint job, but it's certainly gonna benefit from a second round of clear, basically a flow coat. Really make all this flush and smooth. There was a lot of material on, but I just wanna make you guys aware, anytime you're doing some graphics like this, there's always gonna be that step. So a second round of clear is certainly gonna be benefiting. So we get a lot of questions quite often on our YouTube page and our tech that we answer emails in terms of material usage. So on this particular project, I kind of kept a little cheat sheet of what I had, and I kind of just documented what I used. We'll start from the very beginning. Autoborn Sealer Black, right? Now, you remember I did Autoborn over the body filler, anywhere where there was Bondo as well. So this entire car, everything, all of these parts that you see was coated in at least 2 passes, at least 2 coats of Autoborn Sealer Black. So I used just under a gallon. It was actually 112 ounces, and that's mixing it 10% 4011. So for the pearl black, the upper section here, right? So that was basically the spoiler, the upper section of the car, the mirrors, the hood, and parts of the front bumper and the grille surround. I used 3 quarts of pearl black. So just shy of a gallon, and that was also mixed 4-to-1 with 40/50. So moving on to the charcoal, the lower portion of the car. So basically a little bit of the front bumper, the entire back bumper, a small area of the tailgate, and then the sides of the car. That was only 2 quarts. So it's 2 quarts of the charcoal metallic, and that was also mixed 4-to-1 with our 40/50. And I used 16 ounces of the aluminum for the actual, let's say fine aluminum, for the actual marbleizing. So only 16 ounces in that. Remember, I did not mix that with 40/50 because I wanted it to stay wetter a little bit longer. So it was 16 ounces to do all the marbleizing on the entire car, including the hood. And then I went ahead and I had actually 8 ounces of our pearl lime that I used to kind of do some fading, some drop shadows. I used about 2 ounces of emerald green candy. That was mixed 1-to-1 because I was spraying an airbrush. So about 2 ounces of emerald green. That was just to darken the centers and give a little drop shadow on the tops. And then I used 8 ounces of our candy poison green, and that was mixed 6-to-1 and then 4-to-1. So I kind of played with the ratios to do my shading, and that was roughly 3 coats of candy. So it was only, like I said, it was 8 ounces. So not a lot of candy to do everything we did. And then I had about an ounce of the Wicked Detail Black and the transparent red oxide mixture that I used for all the shadowing. So it's basically an ounce, and I mixed that 1-to-1-to-1. So it's 1 part Wicked Detail Black, 1 part transparent red oxide, 1 part 40/50. And then I had about 50 ounces of 4011. So give or take, basically 2 quarts of 4011 and a full gallon of 40/50. And that's everything that we use to do this car. And this is not a small car. There's a lot of real estate on here, being a station wagon. So I think in terms of coverage, I think that's really good in terms of what we're able to do. Again, you went pearl black over sealer black, which is great. It was about 2 coats. Keep in mind when you guys are doing something, there's always a chance that there's going to be some dust or some dirt or some kind of contamination, where you always want to have enough to go back and maybe scuff out with a little 6 or 800 and then recoat it. So I'd rather see you guys have a little bit more than exactly right on that number, and then find out, man, if I had another 16 ounce, if I had another pint, it would be awesome right now. So just keep that in mind, in terms of the numbers. And then we basically used the American Icon Clear. I used the Euro Clear. I remember I told you guys that's like a 5 liter? So it's like 1.5 gallons. Actually, with everything between all the parts and doing as much clear work as I did, I used 2.5 gallons of clear on this. And again, that's without being flow coated. So enough material to build, enough material to sand all this down, and we'll probably use about another gallon at least in terms of doing this as a flow coat. So keep that in mind. It's a lot of material, So again, that's the finished product. Thank you guys for checking us out. Thank you guys for kind of riding along the wave on this project. So we got a bunch more in the works. Got some really cool ones coming up, more automotive, big full-size kind of repaints and some cool stuff. So stick around for that. For Createx Colors, I'm Chris Arpin. Thanks for checking us out. We'll see you guys next time.